Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm just going to give you a quick warning that I never really do on any of my stories, but it felt appropriate here. This story deals a lot with prison life, and as prison life goes, there's quite a few things I don't normally touch on, like very gross situations and sexual violence. So, listener discretion advised. And now, on to tonight's story. I was jolted awake about an hour ago, confused and disoriented. My heart was pounding and my sheets were soaked in sweat. Some slavering, malevolent horror was in the trailer with me, creeping up on me while I slept with poised claws and razor teeth. The absolute certainty of this coated my mouth with a metallic taste of fear, sour and dry and thick. I grabbed the baseball bat that laid beneath my cot and tiptoed around the cramped darkness of my trailer, straining to hear over the keening of the wind outside and the pounding of my own heart. Of course, there was nothing here except my goldfish and yours truly, the sweaty guy in his underwear. It was the gusting wind that startled me awake. It happens quite often in the late autumn and early winter. The wind rips through the scrub of skeletal trees that surround the trailer park. It charges with a lion's roar into our lonely huddle of frail little shelters. It gibbers and shrieks and pounds on our walls and uses fists of dead leaves and frozen grit. Satisfied I wasn't about to become chow for some unspeakable creature, I laid back down on my squeaky, saggy old cot and tried to get back to sleep. But I couldn't. Instead, I found myself thinking about that night in the penitentiary. The night of the lockdown. I kept thinking about Mikey and Big Rob and the rest of them. All of us huddled in a cell with the lights off and the frigid northwest winds howling at the walls. After a while, I gave up trying to sleep. Instead, I sat down in front of the computer and I started typing. I'm no storyteller. Not like Mikey or Hutch. But I'll try my best. When I first came to the pen, the thing that struck me the most about the place was just how much the cons talked. On the occasion when I'd served time in the county jail, there'd been talk, sure, but it was tense and impersonal. When they're only serving a few months, I guess a lot of people feel the situation's too temporary to bother forging any ties with any of their fellow inmates. You'd play cards with your cellies, you'd sit in the day room and watch TV in relative silence. The only time there'd be any noise or action was when a scrap broke out over a card game. Fights were the only thing that passed as excitement in county. Every other moment of the day was comprised of dull, boring nothing. Going in, you just hoped that the food wouldn't be too bad. Your cellie wouldn't end up being a gang member, a meth head biker waiting out a long patch of dead time. People, in other words, people who might beat the shit out of you as a way to pass the hours. The pen, though, it's an incredibly noisy, smelly, vocal environment. I remember very clearly the moment when my little group of new arrivals, we were all let out of the fish tank and into our new home. A pod housing 200 inmates. Son, I was overwhelmed by the deafening din of voices and activity when the hacks marched us, bundles in hand, out onto the range. Of course, there was the obligatory cat calls, wolf whistles, but most of the cons seemed completely oblivious to us. They were busy living the ebb and flow of the penitentiary life. Of course, not exactly true. Cons see everything, and I mean everything. But they talk even more. My first cellie wanted both my bail and my ass in that order. Wasn't happening. Hammered in the mouth and it was on. The fight spilled out of the cell and into the corridor of the pod. He was a big, tough old bull, but I had him leaking and his confidence was shaken. Before the COs got us, I'd managed to get the nasty old fuck face down on the floor, and I was whamming away at the back of his head and neck like a jackhammer. And the hacks got there, and one of them laid a size 12 boot upside my skull. The kick knocked my brain clear over the moon. The world immediately went out of focus, and it stayed that way for almost 12 hours. Spent the next 3 weeks in the hole for fighting. When I got out, I was placed in a different pod. Word had gotten around the fish wasn't exactly new. They had a mean right cross. No one bothered to try and roll up on me in the yard that day. When I sat down at chow with my new celly and some of his boys, no one objected. I'd been checked. I passed the test. I wasn't a punk or sissy. I could sit with the men. Yeah, it's a different world. Penn is. It's wildly different rules. You couldn't fully understand unless you've been there. It wasn't long before I settled into a routine. Up for head count and chow, off to work in the laundry, chow, nap, workout, chow, then the struggle to fill the dead hours between supper and lights out. There wasn't much to do. The cons played cards, betting with tobacco bales purchased from the commissary, and individual hand-rolled smokes. Some watched TV, others watched the wall. Some watched each other. Tensions were always high between the rival gangs. Dope fiends spiked what they liked to spike in the bathrooms. And there was, of course, a lot of talk. Talk of family back home. Women had and lost. Misdeeds proudly done. There were enough stories flying around that place to fill a library. My celly was an old con named Mikey. He'd originally been sentenced to 15 years of second-degree murder during a robbery, but he had gotten into so much trouble since landing in the pen that he'd managed to acquire an additional 10 years on top of that. Mikey was doing all day, and he made peace with that fact. Good cat, all in all. Straight shooter, he didn't fuck with the spike. The thing was, he'd kill just about anyone, if he got it into his head that he wanted to. In early years, Mikey had been a trigger man for the bikers. He'd been convicted of murders of 6 people, was a suspect in 16 others. And I can imagine that a number of them had probably been friends of his at one point or another. In certain circles, a good friend can become your murderer in the blink of an eye. It's the kind of people you do time with in maximum security. Mikey and his crew liked nothing better than to spend a Sunday evening crowded up in someone's cell, drinking, shooting the shit. Personally, I didn't care much for the hooch. It tasted like rotting garbage with a heavy fruit bouquet. The stories were welcome. When Mikey or one of his homeboys was on a roll, we could all forget ourselves and be somewhere else for a little while. As far as cons go, they were good fucking guys. They were, and these bull sessions were the glue that held Mikey's crew together. I remember watching and listening for hours on end, spellbound, as Mikey or Big Rob or whoever wove a tapestry of words in the thin air around us. It'd make us roar with laughter, clench in rage, even slightly choke up on sadness. Some of the guys could play a man's emotions like a violin with their storytelling. Masters of the form. Most of the time, the stories were pretty coarse, which was to be expected. Look where they were coming from. And occasionally, they were downright fucking horrifying. There's one in particular that I can remember word for word, quite literally. I can actually close my eyes, I can see Mikey and Rob, Hutch, the rest of them, sitting there in the cell that night. All of us bathed in the sickly red glow of the emergency lights, transfixed by what we were being told. This particular story likes to pop up in my head in the small dead hours of the night. When the harsh winds of drab old November lash and rock my rusty little trailer hard enough to wake me up, as they did tonight. Coincidentally, it was on a November night just like this when I heard this story. It's about a year into my 4-year sentence for armed robbery, and this is my second winter in the pen. I recall the goddamn wind was cutting through the walls really badly that night, and the drafts were freezing our toes solid. There'd been a murder that day. Whole pen was on lockdown, all 5 pods, the protective custody unit too. Big Rob Hutch was a man who had his ear to the ground. He had known the lockdown was imminent. He had just enough time to make preparations for what was coming. Happy for a chance to hang out and get fucked up. 7 of us quickly herded into his cell with our bedding. Snacks from the commissary. As much gear as we can get our hands on. I remember that we were all wrapped up in our thin, scratchy blankets like convict burritos. The blankets were gray and made of rough wool. Upon checking into the Razor Wire Inn, you were insured one and only one. In the winter, blankets were a premium. Men would fight for them. Sometimes. Even kill for them. Mikey and Big Rob were both sitting on the lower bunk. Coltrane and his kid Remy had the top one. I was freezing my ass on the floor along with Nick and Richie. Young pups had to sit on the floor. It's just the way it was. The old cons got to snuggle their asses into the relative comfort of thin mattresses, the ones that were covered with the squishy spring slats, and in Coltrane's case, the old con's bitch as well. We weren't complaining out loud about it, though. We knew better than to do that. Big Rob was a trustee, and one of his duties was to mop the floors in the prison morgue. He was telling us what had happened when the coroner performed his autopsy on Stutters. Stutters was a junkie who had been suspected of ratting out various other cons to the cops in exchange for smack. He was the reason why the entire pen was on lockdown. He'd been discovered in his bunk after lunch, dead as a day-old dog shit, half full of ragged holes. The shiv was found in a toilet in the shower room. It had been made from plastic bags, heated to melting with a bic, then compressed to form a sturdy, sharp little weapon. So I'm mopping up where they keep the gurneys, and down by the hall the door opens a bit so I can see the doc leaning over Stutters on the table. He's humming and singing to himself like usual. I'm smiling at how shitty his voice is when all of a sudden the doc says, "Holy shit, did you look at that?" Then he starts gagging and retching, and then get this. He's actually screams, like for real. He fucking screamed. And he yells, "Jesus Christ, it's all over my fucking arm." Runs out of the room. Down the other hall, I'm like, what the fuck was all that about, right? I hear him yelling for his assistant, or whoever, the younger one. They all come running back. I heard one of the assistants say, "Oh fuck, you gotta be kidding me." Then the smell hits me. And from all the way down that long-ass hallway, it's putrid, boys. It smelled like a combination of rotting flesh and the old shithouse in August. I had to grab my nose and run the fuck out of there. Worst thing I ever smelled. Nick asked, "What was it from?" And shifted uncontrollably where he sat beside the toilet. He was a good bit younger than me. He had just celebrated his 20th birthday a few months ago. It was his first time in. He'd drawn the fucking short straw 15 years. 8 before he'd be considered for parole. His uncle, unfortunately for Nick, was also serving time in the same facility. He was an upper echelon, Hell's Angel, one who ruled both B-Pod and C-Pod with an iron fist. As a result, Nick was getting the easiest ride a first-timer in the pen ever had. Coltrane and Mikey had personally welcomed the kid into the crew, as per the old man's orders. He was fresh-faced, physically soft. I occasionally wondered if he'd ever really known just how bad it could have been here for him. "Apparently," Big Rob said, lowering his voice to a husky stage whisper, "Stutters was getting checked for pokes and track marks pretty regularly because he got busted so much for possession. So he started shooting it in his ass. But not like his ass cheek, you dig? I mean, right in the wall of his rectum. He was shooting it right inside his fucking ass, man. Can you imagine that? Pretty soon he developed a fucking horrible abscess. Because of all the fecal bacteria and the crap that was living up his old dirt road, the abscess got infected real bad. After a while, it skinned over with a crust of white blood cells and gross stuff. It ballooned out this giant bubble. Bubble got so big, it was eventually closed up the poor fucker's ass. I mean, right fucking shut. He was apparently going around like that for like weeks, man. Like, for real. Weeks. It must have hurt like a bitch. So Doc saw something kind of bubbling out of the dead fucker's ass, prodded it with his scalpel, and pop. Out gushes a metric fuck ton of bloody green pus, full of dead bacteria stinking like the devil's back. Out gushes a metric fuckload of bloody green pus, full of dead bacteria and stinking like the devil's ballsack. "Oh, fuck, that's just dirty, man," Mikey groaned, and mimed throwing up all over Hutch. We were all wrinkling our noses in disgust and shaking our heads. Dirty was not nearly adequate for this disgusting image. That ain't it, though, my friend. That ain't it. The worst part, he continued, was the fact that Stutters had been bunged up with his fucking balloon for weeks, so, stopped up his shit canal. So when the doc popped that thing with the scalpel, oh, hell, it was a literal shitstorm. Spurted out of him like a high-pressure hose. We regarded that image for a moment or two in stunned silence. I felt a bit ill. So fucking dirty, Mikey roared. And despite what I just heard, I had to laugh. Coltrane and the others joined in. Remy just looked disgusted. He was filing his nails. Remy was no longer just another cell block punk, a weaker man that traded what he had to trade in order to get by in a world dominated by strength. After a year or so of enduring the subservient role at the receiving end of Coltrane, he'd finally stopped playing the part and was now living it. It was apparent that he started living it again. So the doc got shit on by a corpse? Said Richie, in a slow and dreamy tone. And it was pus-covered shit. It's fucked up, man. Hey, do you think that happens a lot to him, or was that the first time? Richie had snorted some hydromorphine earlier, and now he was somewhere in the clouds, floating around with a stoned grin on his face. Richie, that's just fucking... Mikey trailed off. Actually, it's a good question. Want some hooch, boys? I was just opening my mouth to say fuck no when there was a pop, and everything was dark. The cons began yelling and hooting all across the pod, both tiers on both sides. Big Rob yelled, "Shut up, will you fucking idiots? Just a blackout, for Christ's sake. Pipe the fuck down." And for a wonder, some of them actually did. Thing was, Big Rob Hutch was, well, just that. Big. He was as big as a buffalo. I was surprised that the lower bunk could support both Rob and Mikey, who was not exactly small himself. The emergency light snapped on, soft and red and eerie, and made the common area of C-Pod look like a scene from an apocalyptic horror movie. We could see the guard standing there in the guard hut through the bulletproof glass, waiting to see how the cons were going to react to the power going out during a lockdown. Now, not only were we sequestered in our cramped little cells for an undeterminate length of time, we had also been rendered unable to properly read a book. A number of cons could actually read, and did, or see your hand while playing cards, or even listen to the radio, for Christ's sake. The hack was a dark figure swathed in dim red, his body language alert and poised for action. Pretty sure it was Robson who was the boss on hut duty for that night. Robson was a dead-eyed, square-jawed oaf without an ounce of empathy in his whole body. He just so happened to have a 12-gauge shotgun on hand with a modified choke. I fervently hoped that no one would take it in their heads to start some serious shit, because if they did, there was a good chance we'd all regret it. There was a lot of hollering and door-kicking around the pod, but it soon became apparent that the ruckus was just for show, and was half-hearted at best. We all silently thanked whoever might be listening that the emergency reaction team wasn't going to be called in. The ERT didn't fuck around. Kevlar-suited, anonymous in their visored helmets, they'd march into the pod and indiscriminately barge into cell after cell, busting heads, whopping out teeth with their batons. Hell, might even get shot. And the ERT shoot to kill. Richie broke the silence. Man, I was getting real worried there for a minute. If the fucking goon squad busted in here, found all our shit, we'd be dicked. Richie was doing 6 years for selling pills. The sentence of a second-time loser. Oxycontin and hydrocodone were his chemical of choice. Faced with the boredom of prison life, he'd started using the product he sold. He was a straight-up junkie by Christmas of that year. Mikey didn't care about anyone using junk. Would even have a little snort here and there himself. But he didn't like addicts. Not one bit. He got Richie out of the crew. Addled by junk, plagued by debt, weak and alone, Richie ended up bunking with some fella from the top tier across from us. The black tier. In a maximum security penitentiary, this was unpleasant connotations. Richie ended up bunking with some fellas from the top tier across from us. Jesus. Felt horrible for how that ended for Richie. Still do. His desperate last bid to cling to his wretched moral existence only prolonged the inevitable. He was dead within a month. One day after enduring his mourning, God. I'm rambling now, aren't I? Sorry, I do that sometimes. You just have to bear with me. I guess I'm not so good at this, unlike Mikey or Hutch. The lonely guy who can't sleep some nights when the shrieking wind could have been mistaken for wailing of lost souls. Shaking, rattling the windows in their frames. Even though I was released from the pen 15 years ago, I still can't shake the feeling that I'm somehow still inside. Just, we're all imprisoned by something, on some level, aren't we? On nights like tonight, my prison is the rusty trailer. My pathetic, menial job. My divorce. My raw, red-eyed fury, unfocused and impotent. Sorrow. Regret. On nights like tonight, my prison is the past. My inability to leave it behind. So there we all were, sitting there in the weird red gloom, listening to all the yelling and bullshit slowly die down. Richie abruptly went on the nod. Nick balanced a shoe on his head. We all chuckled. Coltrane started talking about the hockey game that was about to start. Then abruptly shut up. We were in a lockdown. No electricity. It'd be no hockey game that night, not for us. We passed a J around. When that one was roached, we passed another. Finally, Mikey spoke up and broke the silence. So, who's up for some Twilight Zone shit tonight? I got a good one for you. Remember the last time the power went out, Hutch? Hutch shot him a dark look, then did something very unusual for a hardened con. He shuddered. You want to tell the boys that story? I don't know, man. Why not? Fuck, the lights are out. The winds are howling out there. Perfect time for it. Okay, fuck it. Let's do this. Big Rob cleared his throat and said, Okay, boys. It's time for a scary story. Crowd around the fucking campfire and grab a cup of the fine wine. It's more of a brandy, I think, Hutch. Mikey grinned and offered me some. Reluctantly, I accepted a styrofoam cup of the murky, eye-watering stuff and steered myself to swallow it. I was feeling a bit happier now. Always been a fan of spooky stories. His voice stern, Mikey growled, Okay, first things first. This shit is 100% true, got it? We're not bullshitting about any of this, for real. So don't tell us that we're all full of shit, or you can go have a fucking sleepover with that asshole over at the Hackin' Shack. Got it, Richie groaned, and flopped over onto the floor. He was out of it. This all went down a long time ago, before any of you were here. At least 12 years, I'd say. Mikey? Yeah, for sure. At least that long. Back when these little punks were still giving out handjobs in juvie. It was a while back anyway. Me and Mikey were both running with different crews back then and different shit. We knew each other. Guess I would have been about your age, he said, pointing down at me. So one day the fish tank had just been emptied out in the pond, right? There's a new fish with him, and immediately starts turning heads. I was playing checkers on the tier upstairs. They all came walking through the gate, looking like a bunch of lost little lambs down there on the range. Came toddling in behind a couple of the hacks. At the end of the line, he's the prettiest little sweet boy this whole penitentiary had ever seen. I don't play no grab ass like Coltrane up there. This guy, he was, I don't know, an angel or something, too perfect. Picture out of a magazine, slender, fair-haired, heartthrob material. This kid is pretty, all right. Looked like he'd be easy to punk. Big Rob took a moment to pause and force back a swig of the awful, cloying Pruno, a noxious blend of fermented fruit, sugar packets, and yeast. As he grimly swallowed it down, Mikey jumped in and continued the story. New fish immediately drove the whole pod completely fucking nuts. The wolves were losing their mind for real. The guards, they were looking worried. A guy like that can cause a lot of hard feelings between the bulls. Hard feelings usually turn into murder. So they release the other fishies into the care of the boss of the guard hut. Then, they hustled the pretty boy off to a protective custody, post-fucking haste. Kept him there for a few days. The wolves didn't forget about him, though. Not for a moment. All the time they're asking about this guy to the trustees who had access to PC. They're asking if the kid's lonely, if he wants a candy bar, or a fuck book, or a baggie of fucking horse, or whatever. They're handing the trustee love notes to give to him, money, weed, all kinds of shit. Finally, con named Holbrook called in some heavy favors. The hacks moved the kid back into the pod, more to the point, to Holbrook's cell. I remember watching as the hacks walked the young fella across the pod up the stairs to his new home. Kid had no expression on those wide blue eyes, none at all, just blank. The Holbrook was a big, greasy son of a bitch. Real nasty. You could smell him from 20 feet away. Complete psycho, that guy. Man, I'll tell you. The way his brookie grinned and waited at the door of his cell for his new little bunk buddy to arrive, hell, it made me feel sorry for the kid. He was planning to do bad things to the guy, and you could see it in his grin. He's gonna hurt him. No expression at all on the guy's face when he shows up. I remember thinking that the fishies were either brave as fuck, or just too stupid to understand what was in store for him. Rob tossed back the rest of the hooch in his Dixie cup and tried not to gag. Shit's fucking awful. Who brewed this? Our fine neighbors down the hall, that's who. They managed to hide it in the toilet tank long enough to get her finished. Now, holy Jesus, it nasty. Fuck. I feel myself going blind already. Hutch held out his cup and Mikey poured him another gurt out of the plastic bag, taking care to make sure the sock he was using as a filter didn't slip and spill a rotting fruit cocktail all over the bunk. I tried a sip of mine and almost retched. They all had a good hearty har at this, except for Richie, I guess. Richie was still laying on the floor, his eyelids fluttering and twitching. It broke more than a few hearts to see Holbrook get his dirty hooks into the kid first. He'd wrecked that kid, destroy his soul. That was the general consensus. Come morning, they'd be rolling the kid into the infirmary, and afterwards, probably stick him back in PC for 24 hours. Even if he did come back to the pod again, no one would want him. Not after the permanent damage that Brookie was liable to do to him. See how lucky you are? Coltrane said to Remy, and his little Frenchman smiled down at his nails in response, then kept filing them, delicately, with all of his concentration. Every now and then I wondered if Remy was already planning the flirtations and indiscretions that would inevitably result in Coltrane's murder. His skull smashed in with 20-pound dumbbell in the weight pit. Coltrane, the bull, who had taken Remy's manhood and eventually transformed him into something that he'd probably never wanted to be. Thinking about it now, I'm pretty sure he was. I can't blame him for it. Rob told us. I heard screaming that night, muffled. But I could hear it. So did my celly back then, old Johnny Finisi. Whispered up to him, "You hear that shit, man? Fuck, that's awful." It was one of the worst nights here. I heard it too, Mikey interjected. I think we all did, including the bosses on duty that night. No one wanted to check on him because money makes the fucking rules around here, not the warden or the government. It's money. I don't doubt that sick fuck offering big coin for the kid. Some cold son of a bitch sold him without a second thought. Hutch nodded sourly. Money's a whore. That's okay, though. There's a thing called karma, too, and when the morning came, lo and behold, Brookie ain't standing outside of his cell, waiting to be accounted for, and neither's the kid. Whisper popped up real quick, spreading down the lines like a breeze. It said Holbrook went ape shit on the kid last night, killed him. He waited in his cell for the ERT to come in and bust his head. The boss, doing the head count, paused at Holbrook's cell. Every con craned his head to see what was going on, what was going to happen next. All of us in unison. I seen the hack pull out his radio with one hand and his club with the other. He starts talking real fast into his radio, right? At the same time, slowly walking towards the door of Brookie's cell with his club poised to bash a skull in like he's trying to ward someone off. starts yelling for their hacks to get the fuck over there pronto. They all came thundering past with their keys jangling, their boots clomping, and we all got ordered to step back into our cells with empty bellies. I heard him down there at Brookie's cell yelling into their radios, stomping around, then I hear someone barf. He had the puke splatter on the tiles. We had to stay in our cells for a few hours. And there was a lot of bitching. I mean, I remember just being totally, completely pissed at Holbrook, me and Johnny F. We assumed that he'd gone psycho on the new fish, cut the kid's throat while he was fucking him or some shit like that. But then some of the emergency response guys come wheeling past this gurney. And when they wheeled it past us again, you could have knocked me flat with a pea shooter. It was Holbrook strapped in there, not the kid. I only saw him for a few seconds. I remember his face was fucked. Mostly gone. Stripped right down to bloody sinew and bone, no skin or muscle left. It's fucking gruesome. Kind of gasped out loud, even closed-mouthed. Crooked-nosed old Johnny F. had to look twice and say, "What the fuck?" The only way I knew it was him was the hair. Big greasy mop of it like a caveman. The sheet covered the body. It was soaked right through with his blood. I think the rest of him must have matched his face. Nick whistled and said, "Fuck, man, that's hardcore." Then sparked another joint. We floor dwellers had almost forgotten about the discomfort of our numb behinds and tingling feet. We'd forgotten the lockdown and the power outage and even poor Stutters, who not only died a violent death, but had died with his ass blocked up by a cystic sore the size of a human fist. Mikey and Hutch were telling a story, and we were living it. You know what I mean? We were right there. Mikey said, "It must have been 5 minutes later. The cops are rolling this crazy-looking thing down the block." And I'm like, "What the fuck is that?" to my cellie. He doesn't know either. For too long, they roll it past again, and I'm like, "Oh shit, look at this. You ever see Silence of the Lambs? The dolly cart thing they strap Anthony Hopkins to when they're moving him. Yeah, that's what it is. And they've got the kid strapped to it. Bite mask and everything. Kid's just soaked in blood. Man, it was dripping off his clothes. I could hear it spattering on the floor behind him. Left a trail on the floor. They let us out for breakfast about a half hour after that, but then it was almost lunch. We got served a fucked up mix of warm lunch, cold breakfast. There was more talking going on than eating, though. Everyone was saying the same thing we were all saying. What the fuck did that kid do to him? Most people thought he must have gotten a hold of Brookie's shiv somehow, then sliced the fucker right off. Whittled him right down to the bone. But Brookie was a really big dude. Guy was a crazy motherfucker. How a skinny little bitch like that overpower a bad dude like Brookie so easy? I mean, we don't know. The joint traveled around the floor folk and was then handed up the bunks. Mikey hit it hard and made that funny choking noise older guys sometimes do when they hold a big toke, nasal and strangled. He gave Nicky the thumbs up and blasted out smoke like a grizzled old dragon. "It's pretty good, Nicky. Good score. Gotta get some more of that." "Yeah, kid." He got rolled off the hole in his fucking Hannibal Lecter dolly, and they had him in a super tight lockdown. Nobody even catches a glimpse of him. Had the kid on 24-hour watch. The whole works. A couple trustees tried along with the hacks, asked what happened to him and Brookie, and they got told to mind their own business. Mop the fucking floors. The kid in the hole for a week, then two, then, I don't know, month. All the while, ain't no one heard a peep out of him getting charged with murder. There was a rumor going around that the coroner said in his report that Holbrook had died from a heart attack. Maybe his heart seizing up was the thing that actually killed him, but sure. There wasn't any mention of what we'd seen carved up like a Sunday turkey, not at all. Mikey poured himself another round of refreshment, and the stink of the open bag made my eyes water. Hutch smiled a little, an action with no real humor behind it. Well, tongue's gonna waggle, as they tend to do. Pretty soon people were saying that maybe the kid wasn't natural. He did Brookie in with his teeth. He ate the fucker alive, like some sort of monster. Guys were even saying that the The priest paid him a visit in the hole, ended up leaving with tears in his eyes. Actual fucking crying and shit. Wouldn't say what happened. Just that he didn't want to talk to the kid never again. He quit. He quit working here not long after that happened. Just up and quit. And I heard that Padre ended up selling his house and moving away. Like, across the country. Somewhere far, far away. Mikey's iron-gray beard split with a slight grin of his own. Now, here is where shit gets really weird. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast, or by finding this in some other way that's not a podcast or a video, which I probably didn't upload, but hey, thank you for listening. And as always, I want to give a big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. That includes everybody who's been waiting for me to update my Patreon, and I thank you all so much for being so patient with me. But especially, I want to give a thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Chance Burnett, Kraus, Tristain Pelton, AcidSystem, Adam Gerecke, Aeryn Stormcrow, Aika Limchoc, Amber Clark, Angelus, Atomaurus, Bastion Beefcake, Blue the Enigma, Brayden Morris, Broken Beast 320, Captain Scurvy, Caspian, ChellyJay, CoryxKenshin, Cronut 509, Crusader Chocobo, Cryptic Nightmares, Curse Pots Primarch, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Daniel Polson, Darth Miver, Deleted Account, Dirt Diver 030, M, Esteban, Fester's Lampshade, Freddy Krueger, Gorag Trimagazine, Grand Moff Inoki, Hades Nephew, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Harley, Himbo Jerry, Horseman Sect Time, Insanity Gamer X, Jay Cairns, Jesus Cornell, Jordan Humble, Justin LaFontaine, Kaylee Ambrose, Kiri the Sloth, Crazy Kid, Cryolinian, Lambda M98, Lisa Cottrell, Little Crow, Lord Life's Best, Lupita Galvin, Love You Eminem, Matt Bach, Melted Lake, Michael Allen Jr. Bashirs, Mike, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Nate Cull, Nico Kayo, Psychomel, Red Shadow Cat, Rob Like Sharp Things, Samahai, Sashi Suzaku, Seclude, Stricken, Tali Sue, Tater Chip, That Creepy Chick, The Ginger Bros, Turtle Man, Voice of Sand, William King, Xavier and Cheyenne, Yargul, and Zachary Graphius. If you'd like to join this list of names that I horribly mispronounce, then please head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, or you can always check out the names in the description down below, or you can honestly support for even just $1, because it really helps me out when you guys do, and I appreciate it infinitely. So thank you all on Patreon, thank you all so much. Thank you for watching on YouTube and subscribing and liking videos and leaving comments about videos that you like, or leaving comments about why I haven't finished the 4th audiobook yet, or leaving comments about new stories that you've seen and you'd like to see on this channel. And to everyone, sweet dreams.